The story I'm going to read is entitled Door Jamb. It's a love story of sorts. I needed a job. Hadn't worked in months. Broke at 19A Kendrick Ave in Worcester, Mass. Eating box after box of spaghetti, living with a part-time employed girl I'd marry one day, and always wonder what I was thinking. Because the next thing I knew, I was walking down the aisle when I should have been walking down the road. It must have been 1980 because the U.S. beat the Russians in hockey at the Olympics that winter. It was the night before Christmas when I went out to find a tree to decorate, so things at the apartment would look like we had half a life of some kind. And I only had a couple of bucks on me, which I didn't really want to spend on a tree anyway, and so that's probably why I waited till Christmas Eve, figuring they'd be all about gone and the desperate guys in the tree lot would practically give away what was left over. Rabid trees, demented wreaths, and discarded plastic ribbons. I ended up getting a really tiny tree for $1 and hid it behind my back as I approached the apartment, where my Jewish girlfriend was waiting for me, and who loved Christmas more than I did. And then I rang the bell at the front door, which I never used because I only had the key to the rear one, and there was a door chain always locked on the inside of the front, even if I did have a key. Then I backed away from the door to get myself situated under the apartment building floodlight to give a little perspective to the scene when she opened up. And when she did, I smiled, probably something pathetic like from Charles Dickens, and whipped it out from behind like it was a bouquet of roses. And she squealed with delight and the enchantment she always imagined Christmas would bring as a little Jewish girl in Pennsylvania who couldn't celebrate Christmas, clapping her hands and jumping up and down and out onto the snow-covered cement landing with only socks on. I was 30 and she was 25, and we should have been further along in life than we were, but that night we felt right on top of the holiday season and the Christmas wonder world we were creating. We had to stick the little tree bottom in an empty tomato can and then between two bricks to keep it up, and it worked fine as a base for holding water on top of the table where it stood. And we decorated it with everything we could find, including a couple of green bananas and cat treats and the socks she just took off because they got wet on the landing. We cooked some spinach-flavored spaghetti to drape over the branches like tinsel, and used some neckties I had and frayed psychedelic tights from her, and it looked amazing. We had no bulbs to plug into it, but stood a few flashlights up underneath, and when they were turned on, acted like those lights that searched the sky for planes in the old wars. We hugged in front of the tree, and her eyes went moist. I could have cried, but I was thinking about that $1 I just spent, and the miserable $60 I had in the bank, and now being one down on the spaghetti supply, and how I needed a job, and so I stood strong there and just held her and my breath with closed eyes. At that time, my girlfriend was only working 15 hours a week, cooking the books for some guy who owned a garage, and I suspected she was getting robbed, because he was a crook to begin with, and was only paying her $3.50 an hour under the table. She told me he was always checking her out, but we didn't want to mess with the $210 a month, so she let him gawk. She'd even tarred it up a little for work with some makeup and heels, hoping a little raise of the skirt would equal a raise in pay. This was one of the ways she knew how to get by in life. And me, I'd find someone who wanted to learn self-defense, so I'd get a gig doing that here and there, and between us we made most ends barely meet. That winter began to pass quickly, and the cat, who was always in a trance of greed over the tree, wrecked almost everything on it, which was still tilting there and browning, and mostly brittle in mid-March, even though it kept pouring water into that can, and that's how it lasted so long. We had eaten the bananas by New Year's Eve, and the cat climbed up like I was on morphine, slow as a sloth, and got the treats, and the spaghetti was long since brittle and of great interest to the cat as well, and so that's how it became a wreck of a Christmas tree in the end. The weather was getting warmer, and I could smell the earth. I needed to remember the ground. So I looked for a job at the huge nearby mental hospital. Someone I knew worked there and said it was a good place with excellent benefits, lots of days off and overtime, if you wanted it, in the counseling department. They'd orient you in a week and set you up to talk to the ones on the chronic psych wards, who are always harmless no matter what you hear. All you had to do pretty much was go to a staff meeting every day and keep notes on what you talked to the patients about, which usually wasn't all that much, and you could dress it up in the notes if you liked, is what he said they all did there. So I went for an interview, and two women were asking a lot of questions about why I'd be good for the job and what I could bring that was special, and I hate those questions. But at some point it came to me in my background in self-defense, beyond the psychology master's degree I'd picked up along the way. And they were very interested in the karate business and seemed to want me to get the job. They said they'd call when they were ready to let me know something. As the weather warmed at 19.8 Kendrick, I'd wake, go for a run, come back, make some Weetabix cereal, chop off and chew a slice of ginseng root, then read about Buddhism and meditate and fall asleep in the middle of it. Sometimes I'd go over to the apartment of the old man war vet in the next building, and we'd sit outside in army surplus jackets on folding lounge chairs and drink one of his GIQs of Miller High Life each out of the bottle in the sun. And I'd get drunk as mad because I wasn't a drinker then. He'd show me his collections, things mostly that he thought were valuable or that he wanted at the time, but just ended up cluttering his little apartment with doodahs. Once he gave me a small black and white portable TV, which was very, very cool of him to do because he had 3 of them lying around in the middle of all his knickknacks and memorabilia, in addition to the big color one he watched in his living room. And he handed it over once we caught a good beer buzz because he liked me. And I kept that TV for more than 30 years and only recently gave it to Goodwill. I don't think you can even plug a TV into a wall socket anymore and get anything. But it was in factory condition, so I figured maybe someone could get it going and find something on 56 or 38 or one of those other UHF channels. Sometimes good for nothing for one guy is good enough for someone else. I waited 2 days to hear from the hospital, and I was getting antsy and more broke, since I thought I had the job, according to my friend, and started spending some of the $60 in the savings on a silkscreen t-shirt for my girlfriend. And we ate at a Chinese restaurant both nights and shared scorpion bowls through straws at the bamboo tiki bar of the Emerald Garden around the corner, and got hammered and laughed. But I was thinking about the job and the money and couldn't quite relax all the way. And plus I was having trouble relaxing around her anyway, which had been going on for almost a year already. Then on the 3rd day, as I was rushing past the front of the apartment building toward the back on my way to the bathroom, I heard the phone ring through the window. And we didn't have an answering machine then. I was thinking if it's them and I don't answer, they'll call the next person on the list and I won't get the job. So there was only one thing to do and only one thing in the way of me and my new job. The front door of 19A Kendrick Ave. That's what I was thinking. I raced to the landing, opened the screen, and threw my shoulder against the wooden front door with a window in the top of it with such force that it burst open, but the chain was latched. So I did it again, and the door jamb and molding it was attached to ripped free, and the entire thing came crashing into the tiny hall. Glass broke, wood splintered, a mess. I dove for the phone, which was on the living room floor a few feet away, and caught it on the umpteenth ring and said hello as calm as can be. The woman asked if I was there, and I said it was me on the phone. And then she said she was from Human Resources at Worcester State Hospital, and they were offering me the job. I said okay, and that was good news. I was dying to pee and barely contained myself. And we didn't have a cordless phone, so I was stuck there. I thought about peeing in the Christmas tree can, because the tree was as good as gone anyway, but I didn't. And she asked if I could come in to do paperwork and then plan a start date for orientation. And I said that would depend on when, being all busy and casual about everything. And she said, how about right now? Right now, I said, and then I told her that right now would be good. I told my girlfriend that I got the job, and we knew then that we were set, and rich even, compared to what we were, with the regular state paychecks, built-in promotions and paid vacations, and holidays, personal days and sick days, which accrue, and full medical and dental, for me anyway. We could buy things and eat what and where we wanted, and I could bring the GIQs over to the old man in the next building for a change, and fix the door so as not to be in trouble with the landlord. I was never one to break down doors to achieve something, so the whole door incident was quite a dramatic effort, which was motivated by temporary poverty, mild embarrassment at my unemployed status, and also because I often felt bored and impotent with my girlfriend. She never said anything about it, but she was not one to talk, even when prompted. At least not about anything deep, or that touched the core of the present or the real. I always liked quiet girls, but she was known instead to speak at great length about other topics, such as local gossip, the achievement and maintenance of a tan, uninspired fashion trends, the price of things, and how expensive everything was, and what was on sale, and her hair, which was very long, and she said couldn't ever even be trimmed because of the psychological trauma it would cause, her weight, which never budged, her massive shoe collection of platforms, wedges, and stilettos, her mother's intrusiveness, her father's passivity, both of whose traits she was helpless to resist or adjust to. Her mother's name was Devora, and her father, Milton, was known as Milt, but due to his meekness, both socially and intimately, I usually referred to him as Milk. In large part because of him, she was accustomed to docile men, and was herself quite a limp character about a lot of things. In her heart, she tended to associate and identify with aggressiveness. I was relatively forceful socially, and therefore attractive to her, but I was deeply flawed intimately, at least with her, which caused trouble down the line. She was Jewish, or at least the daughter of Jews. She was not religious, knew nothing of that faith or the Hebrew scriptures, but she identified herself as a Jew and had very Jewish names, both first and last, which she loathed. She once confessed that she had become sexually excited watching an international tennis tournament when the German team was playing. When I asked her why she was so turned on, she simply answered, "Because they're German." She thought this was wrong, and that she was an anti-Semite, and found it to be deeply baffling, but couldn't help it. We know what turns us on, but we don't know why. I believe I represented an exciting aggressor for her, but not a completely satisfying one. After I started the job, I no longer felt imaginary, felt that I was living a genuine life, part of the real world, and mostly on top of things, walking around like a shrink all day. And then, the girlfriend told me she was pregnant. I didn't know which way to go, so I married her, and that was a disaster from start to finish. The proposal, the ring, the ceremony, the short time we were husband and wife, and the long time she spent with another man during that short time. This is all to show that everything changes and is changing, just as we mentioned that everything changes. What was once romantic poverty and sweet and fun and breaking down the doors to open to a new world turned into middle class and bitter and fun-sucking and battening down the hatches to hide from that very same world. It began when I was driving along in a sickly green Renault Dauphine and said that I think we should get married since she was pregnant and we'd been together for so long, even though by that time I didn't feel interested in her on any level except one. She turned to me, incredulous, and asked, "Really?" And I replied, "Yes," from behind the wheel. Then her eyes filled with crocodile tears, and she immediately followed with, "I don't want Jesus' name mentioned at the ceremony." And this came as a big surprise since, as I said, she was totally untutored in Judaism and a non-believer. But then I told my parents, and my mother was happy, because she was always happy about these kinds of things, and never employed any discrimination at all when it came to the wisdom or appropriateness of romantic alliances. My father was worse than so-so, as he didn't particularly care for my girlfriend as a marriage choice, saying she was a poor girl trying to look rich, while all the rich girls are trying to look poor. And he never quite got her name right in those years we dated, calling her Israel instead of her actual first name. And though it was kind of close-sounding, was far off enough to make it clear that he was focused on the fact that it was a Jew I was planning to marry. Besides that, my father was never enthusiastic about romance of any kind. In fact, he seemed dead set against it, and thought it was all a bunch of giddy crap, or hogwash, as he referred to it. Needless to say, he and my mother had a hell of a time being married. My mother gave me a diamond ring to give my girlfriend as an engagement ring that belonged to my father's mother, and though it was huge, it wasn't worth a rat's asshole, and that's all for the best since she kept it. But the weird thing is she kept it along with my last name all these 30-plus years since, and I never understood that except to say she was lazy as a hot day in July, and a spaz who couldn't muster the coordination, energy, or a plan to change the name on her license or other identification when they were ready for renewal, which would be at least 6 times by now since we broke up. But maybe it was also because she hated being Jewish as much as she hated Jesus and wanted an Italian last name instead of her obviously Jewish one to assist her in representing something other than what she was. I often wondered what it must have been like for the guy she had the affair with, who's still with her as far as I know, to live with the constant reminder that she, after more than 30 years, chooses to be branded with my last name. A week before we got married, I found something in the bathroom wastebasket, which turned out to be a container for a tampon. And since she was supposed to be pregnant, I asked her what it was doing in there, and she started talking nonsense about how she had her period and didn't want to tell me because all the plans were already in place and she didn't want to wreck everything. Lying. I was pissed off, but somehow able to allow that outrageously big red flag to pass unheeded. Later, there were more signs, and I let those go too. The marriage ceremony was a miserable little broken-down ordeal at a local playhouse, attended by a few awkward and uncomfortable people, not the least of which was my father. There was a priest from the city and a rabbi brought in from New Hampshire, because he was the only one we could find who'd do a joint ceremony of a Catholic and a Jew. So he had the drill down on that side. But I and the girlfriend had to talk to the priest to tell him he wasn't supposed to mention Jesus at the ceremony because of my future mother-in-law potentially having a kook attack or a fainting spell if he did. The ceremony was flowing like the River Jordan until the priest mentioned Jesus' name and winked right at me like we were in cahoots, and I heard Devorah gasp like she was stabbed in the side. like the air and spirit were let out of her all at once, and you got to see firsthand what they're talking about when they call on
The power in Jesus' name, amen.
And then everyone was crammed into a beautiful but small country inn for a fancy dinner and a lot of cocaine in the bathrooms, supplied by my friends, many of whom were basically narcotics salesmen at the time. I was snorting my face off, and so wasn't able to eat anything, make eye contact, or conversation with anyone. Twice my father asked me what was wrong with me, and why I was wearing sunglasses the whole time indoors. And I said, too loud for that place, that nothing was, and why should I lie? I got nothing to hide, which was a dead giveaway and an incredibly paranoid thing to blurt out. I don't know how I got through the day. I was so anxious and suspicious and juiced up, I could easily have done something crazy like turn myself into police headquarters or start yelling at the reception how I wanted out of the whole deal already. But I didn't and started feeling entombed right away. Good as dead. A mess. We had no honeymoon to speak of. I think the next day we went to New Hampshire for the weekend, and I was reportedly miserable and silent the entire time. That's the way she remembered it anyway, around the time we got divorced, just under 3 years later. There were horses at the place we went to, and I'm allergic to them. But she got on one, even though she was deathly afraid. And the thing took off like a shot, and I saw her flying out of sight, yelling like she was being killed, with the guides racing after her. I felt for a moment that I didn't want her to suffer, but it would be okay if she just went off into a tree or a rock or over a cliff, and that would have taken care of everything. I waited, casually leaning against a barn like the Grim Reaper. Not nervous, but biting my nails anyway. And she came back, her horse under the control of the staff, and was so shaken up she started acting silent and miserable, supposedly like me. So the rest of the day she spent basically rubbing lotion all over her body, which she constantly did anyway, and was annoying, and which made certain parts of her skin look like sausage casings to me. Everything was already a tangle, so I decided to top it off and buy a nice little house, which was the last one on a cul-de-sac, bordered by the woods but very near the city. This place would serve as the scene and stage for all the rumble that went down from there. I don't even know if I should tell you. A year into the marriage, she started acting funny, going to the gym all the time in full makeup after taking a shower and greasing herself up sausage style, like she was looking for a raise from that crook she used to work for. When I asked her why she got all dolled up like fucking Mary Magdalene, who herself was Jewish to begin with, before working out, she started making excuses that were so lame, blah, 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 I didn't even let it all in. Fucking red flag of titanic proportions. He, the guy, aka the gym rat, owned a donut shop, or was a part owner, half a donut shop, I guess. Maybe just the donut hole. I know he was into the hole. His father worked at the hospital where I did, and eventually began working for me as a counselor on the staff that I wound up supervising. The gym guy was a lot bigger than I was, very good looking, though I suspected he'd aged miserably, which I hear he did, and had an extremely long and thick dick. I saw it a couple of times in the locker room. When I saw his dick and then looked at mine, I thought, what the hell kind of a species is he that we could seem so different in that department? Not to say that I was a total failure down there, but when anxious or angry, which I often was when I saw him, my nutsack could look like half a walnut shell housing a couple of raisinets. I satisfied myself thinking that he probably had a chubby on board, because he was a fucking homo, and was all turned on being around naked men, jerking himself off in the stale donut holes when he got to his couch. Around this time, I happened to meet a beautiful girl who looked like Sigourney Weaver, and who had been a police officer in the city for a short while, but quit to become a private investigator. And she tailed the wife free of charge because she wanted to hang around with me, and so I let her. Got lots of info. And my supposed buddies started to sing finally, freaking weasels, talking about how they'd seen her here and there, and also a few things just didn't look right, because I found hair in my car that was neither mine nor hers, and I saw things at the house that were touched in ways I wouldn't touch them, as in a Buddhist statue or an Asian weapon, which was moved and would only be of interest to someone in the house for the first time, and they took it down to check it out, and it wasn't me, and why would she do it? I found ways of listening in on phone conversations she was having with her very stupid friends, pretending I was asleep, but actually listening, and she'd get wise to it and try to catch me, but she never did. I finally caught up with him, the gym rat, the king of freaking weasels, one time while I had a gun on me, a Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum, which I eventually pulled out and pointed at his face after driving around with my brother spying. I saw the wife race out the back door of his house, and when I knocked on his front door and asked for her, he said he didn't know where she was and hadn't seen her. And I told him I just saw her run out the back door through the neighbor's yard, and that's when I pulled the gun and put it in his face, and he froze. And I told him to close his door gently. And when he did, I kicked the middle of it with all my might like I wanted to break it down. But the story on the other side of it was one I didn't really want to pursue. And I knew how it was going to end anyway. Still, the noise of that kick with him right there behind it must have made him shit his cheating heart out, and that was enough of an ending for me. And now, for 30 years, he's still stuck with her as far as I know, in my last name. And that worthless diamond ring, and the donut hole. And I ended up with the best woman in the world who loves me blind, and who I love cross-eyed, and who kept her own damn last name, which I love, and her family, and the creams she uses, and her golden hair, and freckles, and job, and interests, and friends, and more. A couple of years after the rat and the whole story went down, we got engaged in a Mexican restaurant in Boston, and I did it by tossing an emerald and diamond ring in her margarita, while she was in the ladies' room freshening, not greasing, up. And she almost drank it down, but found it rattling around in there with the ice cubes, and was really happy, and never mentioned Jesus. We got married in a church with a priest, and still live happily ever after. And our doors are never jammed, or chained, and always open. And that's just the way we like it.